The dust settled on the rodeo ring, a fine red mist that clung to the air like a ghost. For Jake Riley, it was a ghost he knew all too well. It was the ghost of a life he'd lost, a life of cheering crowds, adrenaline-fueled 8-second rides, and the kind of camaraderie that only came from sharing a dangerous passion. Now, all that remained was the dust, the silence, and the gnawing ache in his soul that had become his constant companion. He leaned against the weathered fence of the corral, his calloused hands resting on the rough-hewn wood. His gaze was fixed on the distant horizon, where the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple. It was a beautiful sight, a masterpiece of nature's artistry. But Jake barely noticed. His world had become a muted landscape of gray, the vibrant colors of life washed out by the flood of his grief. He was a man living in a black and white movie, the soundtrack a mournful dirge that only he could hear. It had been 5 years since the accident. 5 years, but the memory was as fresh as if it had happened yesterday. The roar of the crowd, the smell of the dirt, the raw power of the bull beneath him. He could still feel the violent spin, the world a blur of dirt and sky. He'd landed hard, the impact shattering his leg and his dreams. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the agony of watching Tombstone, a ton of muscle and fury, turn on his best friend, Cody. Cody, who had rushed into the ring to distract the enraged animal, a selfless act of bravery that had cost him his life. The guilt was a constant companion, a heavy cloak that Jake wore day and night. It was a suffocating weight that pressed down on him, a constant reminder of his failure. He'd sold his family's ranch, the place where he and Cody had grown up, the place that held so many happy memories. He couldn't bear to be surrounded by the ghosts of his past, so he had run as far and as fast as he could. He'd taken a job as a ranch hand on a remote cattle station in the heart of Texas, a place where no one knew his name, where he could lose himself in the vast, empty plains. His only companion was Ghost, a magnificent white stallion that was as wild and untamed as the land itself. The horse was a mirror of his own soul, a reflection of the untamed spirit that he had tried so hard to suppress. Ghost was the only living creature that Jake allowed himself to get close to, the only one who had seen the raw, unfiltered pain that he kept hidden from the world. Suddenly a sound broke the stillness of the evening. It was the rumble of an engine, a foreign noise in this quiet corner of the world. A beat-up truck, its once bright paint now faded and chipped, came rattling down the dirt road, a cloud of dust billowing in its wake. It pulled to a stop near the main house, and a woman emerged from the driver's seat. She was a whirlwind of energy, a stark contrast to the quiet desolation of the ranch. Her long, dark hair was pulled back in a messy braid, and her face was alive with a vibrant curiosity. She wore a pair of dusty jeans and a worn-out t-shirt, but she carried herself with an air of confidence and purpose. Her eyes, the color of rich, dark chocolate, scanned the surroundings, taking in the vast expanse of the ranch with a sense of wonder. This was Isabella Bella Rossi, a traveling veterinarian who had been called in to look at one of the ranch's prize mares. She had a reputation for being one of the best, a woman with a magical touch when it came to animals. But as she stepped out of her truck and into the heart of Jake's solitary world, she had no idea that her true purpose on this remote Texas ranch was not just to heal a sick horse, but to mend a broken man. Jake watched her from a distance, his expression a mixture of annoyance and intrigue. He wasn't used to visitors, especially not ones who radiated such a vibrant energy. He preferred the quiet company of his horse and the familiar rhythm of his work. But there was something about this woman, something in the way she moved with such a confident grace, that piqued his interest. He was a man who had become accustomed to the shadows, and she was a woman who seemed to be made of sunlight. Bella, oblivious to Jake's scrutiny, made her way towards the stables. She had a natural affinity for animals, a sixth sense that allowed her to connect with them on a deep and intuitive level. As she approached the mare's stall, she could feel the animal's distress. The horse was a beautiful creature, a sleek and powerful thoroughbred, but its eyes were dull with pain. "Easy there, girl," Bella whispered, her voice a soothing balm. She reached out a hand, her touch gentle and reassuring. The mare, who had been skittish and agitated, seemed to calm at her touch. Bella spent the next hour examining the horse, her movements precise and efficient. She diagnosed the problem, a rare infection that required a specific course of treatment. She administered the first dose of medication, her hands moving with a practiced skill. As she finished, she turned to find Jake standing in the doorway of the stall, his arms crossed over his chest. His face was unreadable, his blue eyes a mask of indifference. But Bella, who had a gift for seeing beyond the surface, could see a flicker of something else in their depths, a hint of a pain that mirrored the one she had seen in the mare's eyes. "She'll be fine," Bella said, her voice breaking the silence. "She's a fighter." Jake nodded, his gaze fixed on the horse. "She's a good mare," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You're the one they call Jake, right?" Bella asked, wiping her hands on a rag. "The owner of this place told me to look for you." "I'm just a ranch hand," Jake corrected her, his tone flat. "Well, the ranch hand knows this horse better than anyone," Bella said, a small smile playing on her lips. "I'll need your help to make sure she takes her medication." Jake's first instinct was to refuse. He didn't want to get involved, didn't want to let this woman into his carefully constructed world of solitude. But there was something in her eyes, a genuine concern for the horse, that made him hesitate. And so, against his better judgment, he found himself agreeing. Over the next few days, Bella became a regular presence at the ranch. She would arrive in the morning, her cheerful demeanor a stark contrast to Jake's brooding silence. They would work together, their hands often brushing as they tended to the mare. Bella would talk, her voice a constant stream of chatter, filling the silence that had become Jake's constant companion. She told him about her travels, about the different animals she had healed, about her dreams of one day opening her own animal sanctuary. Jake, for his part, remained a man of few words. He would listen to her stories, a silent observer in her vibrant world. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift within him. He found himself looking forward to her arrival, to the sound of her laughter, to the way her eyes would light up when she talked about her passion for animals. He found himself noticing the little things, the way the sun would catch the highlights in her hair, the way her smile would reach her eyes, the way she would gently stroke the mare's neck, her touch a mixture of strength and tenderness. One afternoon, as they were cleaning out the stables, a task that Jake usually performed with a grim determination, he found himself actually enjoying the work. The scent of hay, the soft nickering of the horses, the rhythmic scrape of the shovel. It was a familiar routine, but today it felt different. It felt peaceful. He glanced at Bella, who was humming a cheerful tune as she worked. She caught his eye and smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that made his heart do a little flip-flop in his chest. "What?" she asked, a playful glint in her eyes. "Nothing," Jake said, a faint blush creeping up his neck. He quickly looked away, a strange mix of embarrassment and pleasure washing over him. Later that day, as they were administering the mare's medication, the horse suddenly became agitated. It reared up, its eyes wide with fear. Bella, who was standing directly in the horse's path, was in danger of being trampled. Without a second thought, Jake moved, his body a shield between Bella and the frightened animal. He spoke to the horse in a low, soothing voice, his hand gently stroking its neck. The mare, recognizing his scent, his touch, slowly began to calm down. Bella, her heart pounding in her chest, looked at Jake with a new sense of awe. She had seen his skill with horses before, but this was different. This was a man who was not just a skilled ranch hand, but a true horse whisperer. He had a connection with the animals that went beyond training, beyond technique. It was a connection of the heart. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Jake just nodded, his gaze fixed on the horse, but Bella could see the emotion in his eyes, the flicker of a feeling that he was trying so hard to suppress. It was a look of concern, of protectiveness, of something more. That evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch, Bella found Jake by the corral, his gaze fixed on the horizon. She stood beside him, a comfortable silence settling between them. It was a silence that was no longer empty, but filled with a new, unspoken understanding. "You're a good man, Jake Riley," Bella said, her voice soft. Jake didn't answer, but he didn't pull away either. He simply stood there, a broken cowboy under a vast Texas sky, a glimmer of hope beginning to dawn in his heart. The woman who had ridden into his life was slowly but surely beginning to heal his shattered soul. The days that followed were a slow dance of advance and retreat, a delicate choreography of two souls learning to move in rhythm with each other. Jake, true to his nature, tried to keep his distance, to retreat back into the familiar comfort of his solitude. But Bella, with her unwavering optimism and gentle persistence, refused to let him. She was like a ray of sunshine, constantly breaking through the clouds of his despair, her warmth slowly but surely thawing the ice around his heart. She made it a point to involve him in the mare's recovery, not just as a helper, but as a partner. She would ask for his opinion, valuing his expertise, and he found himself, much to his surprise, offering it. He knew these horses, knew their quirks and their personalities, and Bella, with her sharp intellect and intuitive understanding of animals, recognized the value of his knowledge. They would spend hours in the stables, their conversations a mix of professional consultation and personal revelation. Bella would talk about her childhood in Italy, about her dream of opening a sanctuary for abandoned animals, and Jake, in turn, would find himself sharing stories of his own, stories of his life before the fall, stories of a boy who had dreamed of being a rodeo king. She would bring him coffee in the morning, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. It was a small act of kindness, but for a man who had grown accustomed to a life of self-imposed isolation, it was a profound statement. It was a message that said, "I see you. I care about you." And Jake, who had long forgotten what it felt like to be cared for, found himself looking forward to the sound of her truck rattling down the dirt road each morning, his heart giving a little lurch in his chest at the sight of her infectious smile. They would sit together in the evenings, the two of them watching the sunset in a comfortable silence. It was a silence that was different from the one Jake was used to. It was not empty, but filled with a sense of shared understanding, a silent communication that went beyond words. They were two lonely souls who had found a strange sort of solace in each other's company. One evening, as they were sitting on the porch of the main house, the sky a canvas of fiery colors, Bella turned to him, a curious glint in her eyes. "Tell me about Ghost," she said, her voice soft. "He's a magnificent horse. Where did you get him?" Jake's jaw tightened. He rarely spoke about Ghost, the horse a living reminder of his past, a symbol of the wild, untamed spirit that he had tried so hard to bury. But there was something in Bella's gaze, a genuine interest that made him want to share his story. "He was a wild horse," Jake began, his voice a low rumble, "part of a herd that roamed these plains. They were rounding them up, selling them off. He was just a colt then, but he fought them with everything he had. He was too wild, they said. Untamable." He paused, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his mind drifting back in time. "I saw something in his eyes," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "A fire, a spirit that refused to be broken. I bought him, spent months working with him. He fought me at every turn, but I never gave up on him. I guess I saw a bit of myself in him." Bella listened, her heart aching for the pain she could hear in his voice. She reached out, her hand covering his. It was a simple gesture, but it sent a jolt of electricity through Jake. He looked at their hands, his rough and calloused, hers soft and gentle. It was a stark contrast, a reflection of the two of them, the broken cowboy and the woman who was trying to heal him. "You have a gentle soul, Jake Riley," Bella said, her voice a soothing balm. "You just keep it hidden beneath a tough exterior." Jake pulled his hand away, uncomfortable with the sudden intimacy. "You don't know me," he said, his voice gruff, his old defenses kicking in. "I know that you're a man who has been hurt," Bella said, her eyes meeting his, her gaze unwavering. "And I know that you're a man who is capable of great love." Her words hung in the air, a truth that he couldn't deny. He wanted to push her away, to retreat back into his shell, but he couldn't. There was a part of him, a part that he had long thought dead, that was drawn to her warmth, to her light. The mare, now named Stella, was recovering well under Bella's care. Her playful nuzzles and spirited neighs were a testament to Bella's healing touch. One sun-drenched afternoon, after they had finished their chores, Bella turned to Jake with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "I've been cooped up in this ranch for weeks," she said, a playful pout on her lips. "I'm a traveling vet, remember? I'm used to being on the move. Show me your world, cowboy. Take me for a ride." Jake, who had been leaning against the corral fence, a rare smile playing on his lips as he watched Stella and her foal, was taken aback. He hadn't taken anyone for a ride on Ghost since Cody. The thought sent a familiar pang of guilt through him, but it was quickly replaced by a new, unfamiliar feeling. A feeling of wanting to share his world, his solitude, with this woman who had brought so much light into his life. "All right," he heard himself say, the word a little rusty from disuse. "But you'll have to keep up." A wide grin spread across Bella's face. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Riley," she said, her eyes sparkling with a competitive fire. They rode out onto the plains, the vast expanse of the Texas landscape stretching out before them. Jake on Ghost, a magnificent white stallion that moved with a powerful grace, and Bella on her own mare, a fiery chestnut with a spirit that matched her own. They rode for hours, the wind in their hair, the sun on their faces. They didn't talk much, but the silence was comfortable, a shared language of two souls who understood each other without the need for words. Jake took her to his favorite spot, a hidden grove of cottonwood trees by a crystal-clear stream. It was a place he had discovered as a boy, a place he had shared with no one, not even Cody. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could escape from the world, a place where he could be himself. They dismounted, letting the horses drink from the stream. Bella looked around, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "It's my church," Jake said, his voice a low rumble. He had never said those words to anyone before, but with Bella, It felt right. They sat by the stream, a makeshift picnic of sandwiches and lemonade that Bella had packed, spread out on a blanket between them. They talked for hours, their conversation flowing as easily as the stream beside them. Bella told him about her family in Italy, about her dream of one day returning to open her own clinic. Jake, in turn, found himself opening up in a way he never had before. He told her about his childhood on the ranch, about his dreams of being a rodeo champion, about the bond he had shared with Cody. "He was more than a friend," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "He was my brother." Bella listened, her heart aching for the pain he had carried for so long. She reached out, her hand covering his. "He would be proud of you, Jake," she said, her voice soft. "Proud of the man you've become." Jake looked at her, his eyes filled with a raw vulnerability that she had never seen before. "I'm not the man I used to be," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "No," Bella said, her eyes meeting his. "You're not. You're stronger. You're kinder. You're a man who has faced the darkness and has found his way back to the light." Her words were a balm to his wounded soul. He had spent so long seeing himself as a broken man, a man defined by his past. But Bella saw him differently. She saw him as a survivor, a man who had been forged in the fires of adversity and had emerged stronger and more resilient. He leaned in, his heart pounding in his chest. He had been so afraid of feeling, so afraid of letting anyone in. But with Bella, it felt different. It felt right. He closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a tender, hesitant kiss. It was a kiss that was filled with all the words he couldn't say, all the emotions he had kept locked away. It was a kiss that was a promise of a new beginning, a new chapter in the story of the broken cowboy and the woman who had ridden into his life. It was a kiss that tasted of sunshine and lemonade and hope. The kiss was a turning point, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had formed between them. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated hope, a beacon of light in the darkness that had enveloped Jake for so long. In the days that followed, the walls around Jake's heart began to crumble, replaced by a burgeoning sense of joy he hadn't felt in years. He and Bella fell into a rhythm that was both comfortable and exhilarating. They worked side by side on the ranch, their shared laughter echoing in the stables. They took long rides across the plains on Ghost and Bella's spirited mare, exploring the rugged beauty of the Texas landscape. For the first time since the accident, Jake felt like he was truly living, not just surviving. But the path to healing is never a straight line, and the ghosts of the past have a way of resurfacing when they are least expected. A few weeks after the storm, a letter arrived for Jake. It was a plain, unassuming envelope, but the return address of the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association sent a jolt of ice through his veins. His hands trembled as he opened it, the crisp paper feeling foreign in his calloused fingers. It was an invitation to the annual memorial event, a tribute to the riders who had lost their lives in the ring. And there, among the list of names, was Cody's. The letter was a punch to the gut, a stark reminder of the life he had left behind, of the friend he had lost. The guilt, which had been slowly receding in the warmth of Bella's presence, came rushing back, a tidal wave of pain and regret. He retreated back into himself, the walls that he had so carefully constructed around his heart going up once more, thicker and more impenetrable than before. The laughter died on his lips, and the light in his eyes dimmed, replaced by the familiar haunted look that Bella had come to despise. Bella, sensing the change in him, tried to reach out, but he pushed her away. He was a man drowning in his own sorrow, and he was afraid of pulling her down with him. He became distant and sullen, His words clipped, and his temper short. He threw himself into his work, from sunup to sundown, trying to exhaust his body so he wouldn't have to feel the turmoil in his soul. "You should go," Bella said to him one evening as they sat on the porch, the silence between them heavy and suffocating. Her voice was gentle but firm, a lifeline in the storm of his despair. "You need to face your past, Jake. You can't keep running from it." "You don't understand," Jake said, his voice a low growl, laced with a pain so deep it was almost a physical thing. "You weren't there. You didn't see what happened. You didn't see the life drain from his eyes." "No," Bella said, her eyes meeting his, her gaze unwavering and full of a compassion that he felt he didn't deserve. "I wasn't, but I see what it's doing to you. It's eating you alive, Jake. This guilt is a poison, and it's killing the man I'm starting to fall in love with." Her words were a harsh truth, a mirror that reflected the broken man he had become. He knew she was right, but the fear was a paralyzing force. The thought of returning to that world, of facing the memories that haunted him, of seeing the pity in the eyes of his former friends, was more than he could bear. But Bella, with her unwavering faith in him, refused to give up. She knew that this was a battle that Jake had to fight on his own, but she also knew that he didn't have to be alone. She decided to give him the space he needed, but she also made him a promise. "I'll be here when you get back," she said, her voice a soft whisper against the backdrop of the chirping crickets. "No matter what you decide, I love you, Jake, and I'm not going anywhere." Her words were a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. Jake, torn between his fear and his love for Bella, made a decision. He would go to the memorial. He would face his demons once and for all, not for himself, but for her, for the future he was beginning to believe they could have together. The drive to the memorial was the longest journey of his life. With every mile that passed, the memories grew stronger, more vivid. He saw Cody's grin, heard his infectious laugh, felt the familiar camaraderie of their shared dream. He arrived at the arena, the site of so many triumphs and his greatest tragedy, feeling like a ghost returning to the scene of his own demise. The day was a blur of faces and voices, a sea of cowboy hats and belt buckles. Jake felt like an outsider, a relic from a forgotten past. He saw old friends, fellow riders who had shared his dreams and his passion. They greeted him with a mixture of surprise and sadness, their eyes filled with a pity that he couldn't stand. He endured their awkward condolences, their well-meaning but empty platitudes, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. He made his way to the memorial wall, a granite monument etched with the names of the fallen. He found Cody's name, his fingers tracing the cold, hard letters. The memories came flooding back, a torrent of laughter and camaraderie, of shared dreams and broken promises. He stood there for a long time, lost in a sea of regret, the roar of the crowd a distant echo in his ears. He was so lost in his grief that he didn't notice the man who had come to stand beside him. It was Cody's father, a man Jake hadn't seen since the funeral. The old man's face was a roadmap of grief, his eyes holding a sadness that mirrored Jake's own. "He was a good man, your friend," the old man said, his voice thick with emotion. "He always looked up to you, you know. You were his hero." Jake's heart ached at his words. "I should have saved him," he said, his voice choked with a guilt that had been his constant companion for 5 long years. "There was nothing you could have done," Cody's father said, his hand resting on Jake's shoulder, a gesture of comfort and forgiveness. "It was an accident, a tragic, senseless accident. But it wasn't your fault, son. You need to let go of the guilt. Cody wouldn't want you to live like this. He'd want you to get back on that horse, to live the life he never got to live." The old man's words were a balm to Jake's wounded soul. He had carried the weight of his guilt for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to be free. He had blamed himself, had punished himself, had hidden himself away from the world. But now, for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't his fault. He returned to the ranch a changed man. The darkness that had clouded his eyes was gone, replaced by a new light, a new hope. He found Bella in the stables, tending to the mare and her foal. She looked up as he approached, a question in her eyes, her heart in her throat. Jake didn't say a word. He simply walked up to her, his arms wrapping around her in a tight embrace. He buried his face in her hair, his body shaking with the force of his emotions. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry for pushing you away." "There's nothing to be sorry for," Bella said, her arms holding him close, her own tears mingling with his. "Welcome home, Jake." In that moment, surrounded by the scent of hay and horses, with the woman he loved in his arms, Jake Riley finally found what he had been searching for. He found forgiveness. He found redemption. He found love. The annual town fair was a vibrant explosion of color and sound, a stark contrast to the quiet serenity of the ranch. Bella, with her infectious enthusiasm, had managed to drag Jake out of his self-imposed exile. He had grumbled and protested, but the sight of her excited smile had been enough to melt his resistance. They wandered through the crowded fairgrounds, a kaleidoscope of sights and sounds. The air was thick with the smell of popcorn and cotton candy, the sound of carnival music, a cheerful backdrop to the laughter of children. Bella, with the wide-eyed wonder of a child, wanted to experience everything. She dragged Jake onto the Ferris wheel, their laughter echoing in the night as they soared above the glittering lights of the fair. She challenged him to a ring toss game, her competitive spirit a delightful surprise. She even convinced him to get his face painted, a silly, spontaneous act that had him grinning from ear to ear. As the night drew to a close, they found themselves in a quiet corner of the fairgrounds, a live band playing a slow, romantic melody. Bella, her eyes sparkling in the soft glow of the fairy lights, turned to Jake, a hopeful smile on her lips. "Dance with me, cowboy," she said, her voice a soft invitation. Jake, who hadn't danced in years, felt a familiar pang of anxiety. He was a man of the earth, a man of horses and wide open spaces. He was not a man of dance floors and romantic melodies, but as he looked into Bella's eyes, he knew that he couldn't refuse her. He took her hand, his heart pounding in his chest, and led her onto the makeshift dance floor. They moved together, a little awkward at first, but soon they found their rhythm. They swayed to the music, their bodies moving as one. Jake, who had always felt clumsy and out of place, found a strange sort of grace in Bella's arms. He held her close, his head resting on hers, the scent of her hair a sweet perfume. He had spent so long feeling like a broken man, a man who didn't deserve happiness. But in that moment, with Bella in his arms, he felt whole. He felt happy. "You're a natural," Bella whispered, her voice a soft murmur against his chest. "I have a good teacher," Jake said, his voice thick with an emotion that he couldn't quite name. They danced for what felt like hours, lost in their own little world. The music, the crowd, the world outside, it all faded away. All that mattered was the woman in his arms, the woman who had taught him how to live again, how to love again, how to dance again. As the last notes of the song faded away, they stood in the center of the dance floor, their hearts beating in a familiar rhythm. Jake looked down at Bella, his eyes filled with a love so profound it took his breath away. He had been a broken man, a man who had forgotten how to feel, but she had brought him back to life. She had been his light, his guide, his salvation. He leaned down and kissed her, a long, slow kiss that was filled with all the love and all the hope and all the promise of a future that was brighter than the Texas sun. The broken cowboy was home. He was finally and forever home. Epilogue. 5 years later, the Texas sun, a benevolent sovereign, cast its golden rays upon the Riley-Rossi Sanctuary, a sprawling haven of hope and healing. The once barren land, a mirror of Jake's own desolate heart, was now a vibrant tapestry of life. Lush green pastures, dotted with wildflowers, stretched as far as the eye could see. The air, once thick with the silence of solitude, now hummed with the gentle symphony of contented animals. The soft nickering of horses, the playful bleating of goats, the contented clucking of chickens. Jake stood on the porch of the main house, a cup of coffee warm in his hands, a quiet smile playing on his lips. The house itself was a testament to their journey. The once dilapidated structure had been lovingly restored, its walls now echoing with the laughter of their 2 children, 4-year-old Cody and 2-year-old Sophia. Cody, with his father's piercing blue eyes and his mother's infectious grin, was a miniature whirlwind of energy, his laughter a constant source of joy. Sophia, with her dark curly hair and her father's quiet intensity, was a budding animal whisperer, her gentle touch calming even the most skittish of creatures. Bella emerged from the house, a radiant vision in the morning light. Her hair, now shorter, framed a face that was even more beautiful than the day he had first seen her. Motherhood had added a new depth to her beauty, a new layer of strength and serenity. She wrapped her arms around his waist, her head resting on his shoulder. They stood in comfortable silence, their hearts beating in a familiar rhythm, their souls intertwined. "What are you thinking about?" Bella asked, her voice a soft murmur against his ear. "I was just thinking," Jake said, his voice a low rumble, "that I'm the luckiest man in the world." Bella smiled, her heart overflowing with a love so profound it took her breath away. "We're the lucky ones, Jake," she said, her gaze sweeping over the sanctuary, their shared dream brought to life. "We're the ones who get to witness miracles every day." And it was true. The Riley-Rossi Sanctuary was a place of miracles. It was a place where broken animals, discarded and forgotten, were given a second chance. It was a place where they learned to trust again, to love again, to heal. But the sanctuary was more than just a home for animals. It was a home for people too. It was a place where troubled teens, sent to them by a local youth program, found a sense of purpose and belonging. They worked with the animals, their own wounded souls, finding a strange sort of solace in the unconditional love of the creatures they cared for. Just last week, a new arrival had tested the limits of their faith. A magnificent black stallion, ironically named Shadow, had been rescued from an illegal fighting ring. He was a creature of raw, untamed fury, his body a roadmap of scars, his eyes burning with a mixture of terror and aggression. He trusted no one, lashing out at anyone who dared to come near. The local authorities had deemed him a lost cause, a dangerous animal that should be put down. But Bella, with her unwavering belief in the power of love and compassion, had refused to give up on him. For days, Shadow had paced his enclosure, a caged storm of fury. He refused to eat, his powerful body growing weaker with each passing day. The sanctuary staff, seasoned animal handlers, were at their wits' end. Even Bella, with her magical touch, had been unable to get close to him. Maybe they're right. A dejected Leo, now a permanent resident and head wrangler at the sanctuary, had said to Jake one evening, his voice heavy with defeat, "Maybe he's too far gone." Jake looked at the stallion, his heart aching with a familiar pain. He saw in Shadow's eyes the same wild, untamed spirit that he had seen in Ghost all those years ago. He saw the same fear, the same desperation, the same desperate yearning for a connection. "No one is ever too far gone," Jake said, his voice a quiet affirmation of his own journey. "He's just forgotten how to trust. We have to remind him." And so, Jake began his vigil. He would spend hours by Shadow's enclosure, his presence a quiet, non-threatening offering of peace. He wouldn't try to touch him, wouldn't try to talk to him. He would simply sit there, his back against the fence, his quiet strength a silent promise of safety. Days turned into a week, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift. Shadow's frantic pacing began to slow. He would stand at the far end of the enclosure, his gaze fixed on Jake, his ears pricked with a dawning curiosity. He began to eat, small nibbles at first, then hearty mouthfuls. One afternoon, as Jake sat by the fence, his eyes closed against the warm Texas sun, he felt a soft nudge against his shoulder. He opened his eyes to find Shadow standing beside him, his head lowered, his once fiery eyes now soft with a hesitant trust. Jake, his heart pounding in his chest, slowly raised a hand, his touch as gentle as a whisper. He stroked the stallion's neck, his fingers tracing the network of scars, each one a testament to a battle fought and won. In that moment, a new bond was forged, a silent understanding between two broken souls who had found a way to heal. It was a miracle, a testament to the power of patience and compassion and unwavering faith. Now, as Jake stood on the porch with Bella, he watched as Leo led Shadow out into the pasture. The stallion, once a creature of fury, now moved with a powerful grace, his coat gleaming in the morning sun. He nuzzled Leo's shoulder, a soft nicker of contentment filling the air. It was a sight that brought tears to Jake's eyes, a beautiful, poignant reminder of how far they had all come. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch. The sky, a canvas of fiery colors, was a mirror of the passion that still burned brightly between Jake and Bella. They stood on the porch, their children playing at their feet, a menagerie of rescued animals surrounding them. It was a chaotic and messy and beautiful life. It was a life that was filled with love and laughter, and the quiet joy of a dream fulfilled. Jake looked at Bella, his heart overflowing with a love so profound it was almost a physical ache. He had been a broken man, a man lost in the darkness of his own grief, but she had seen the man he could be, the man he was meant to be. She had been his light, his guide, his salvation. "I love you, Bella," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that still, after all these years, took him by surprise. "I love you too, Cowboy," she said, her eyes sparkling with a love that was as vast and as endless as the Texas sky. He leaned down and kissed her, a long, slow kiss that was filled with all the love and all the hope and all the promise of a future that was brighter than the Texas sun. The broken cowboy was home. He was finally and forever home.